James, thank you so much for coming into the studio today and to talk about your career and the positive impact of KTP on graduate careers and indeed the innovation and business growth in Northern Ireland. Now, it certainly sounds like you have worn a lot of different hats in your career, from engineering to research to new product development and even supply chain management. I mean, that's a pretty impressive list. So great to have you on today. How are you feeling?
Yeah, good, Orla. Thanks for having me along. Thank you for the opportunity here to chat about this all today.
Well, we can't wait to get started. So first of all, let's take a little look back to earlier on in your career. Now, as we know, you started out in 2015 on a really fascinating KTP between Elmgrove Foods and Queen's University Belfast. But you have done quite a bit since then, since you completed it in 2018. But before we hear all about that, I would love to hear about your background first of all. So can you tell us a little bit about everything from what you studied at uni right up until your KTP project?
I think to start it all off, I'm a chemical engineer graduate and PhD from Queen's University Belfast. But how did I get into chemical engineering? That was perhaps a question as well. And I cast myself back to 15-year-old me sitting in Rennie Endowed School in Macrofield. Professor Ronnie McGee from the School of Chemistry and Chemical Engineering came in to do an outreach talk for prospective students of chemical engineering. And I think it was the career opportunities that Professor McGee put up on the screen that day. And to be quite honest, the cash that was involved in it as well for a salary. So because it was always a case of I was always STEM orientated, and no matter what I was was always doing triple award science and additional maths and further maths and physics and everything. And I didn't want to go down the medicinal route. It was probably a straightforward pathway to choose, but I had one slight problem, and that was I hated blood. Oh. So blood wasn't my thing.
That's quite a blockade.
So I thought, how could I go down the STEM route, which would give me a lot of things similar to medicine, but not medicine because of blood and things like that. And then Professor McGee came in that day to Dr. Peg's chemistry class and give a whirlwind presentation. And I remember jumping in the Jeep going home with my dad that day, and I says, I'm going to apply for that course at university. I'm going to apply for it. So I did apply for it, and I got into it. Done the course, done the masters in chemical engineering, and went on then to do a PhD as well, and that was on a part-time basis with the Knowledge Transfer Partnership. A highly worthwhile and impactful scheme, I have to say. I thoroughly recommend it to anybody who's coming out as a young graduate who wants to gain some business experience, but also wants to keep their hand and their knowledge going within the research science field as well, and wants to create an impact in industry. And I think that was part of the whole reason why I went for it. But I'll be honest, whenever I was going for it, I didn't know anything about a KTP, a Knowledge Transfer Partnership. And it all came around through Professor David Rooney, who's now the Dean of Internationalisation, and he was the Head of Chemical Engineering at Queen's University as well. And he had a master's project with a local agri-food processor in Northern Ireland. They had a problem, and they approached Professor Rooney and they said, look, how would we do it? And he says, well, we'll put a master's student onto it first. And at that time, the master's students' projects were all ranked in grades and stuff like that. I put it down as the first one because agriculture, agri-food, I'm from the country. I thought I knew a fair bit about it. So I thought, that's one up my street. So I applied for it and got the master's project, went on ahead, and the next thing I knew, I was whisked into a meeting with the prospective company, with Lorraine Marks from KTP, and Professor David Rooney, and we were chatting about this whole opportunity of the project to go forward, the funding of it and stuff. And I says, where are we going here with this? And David, he says to me, he says, we're going to try and get this as a KTP, as a graduate job for. He says, I know you want to try and stay local to Northern Ireland with your work and different bits and pieces. And he says, there's an opportunity to diverge us from a master's project up into something working and physical on the ground. And at that time, there was a lot happening. So it was a great opportunity to see what also came back and researched more about KTP, the benefits of it, how it was going to benefit the company, academia, and myself. And then I was going to be writing up the reports and everything as a research perspective and all for it. And I said, if I'm writing this up to go on to various different journals and papers and publications, could I not register as a part-time PhD then for it as well? And they said, yes, of course, because there's an allocation in your budget towards skills and new training. So I done it. I registered for the part-time PhD, and people thought he's nuts, he's gone crazy again. And I worked full-time as the KTP, studied part-time for the PhD, and it was great. It was really, really good. And as well as that, you can bring about a great work-life balance. For me, myself, I'm all into my rugby, I'm all into my skiing now this past few years as well, and into my running as well. So I've done a few marathons and stuff like that. So grit and determination is in there, and motivation. So whenever I get something in my teeth, yeah. So KTP was one of those things that actually gave me the bit to go further, and actually propel me for life to where I am now today in my career. So yeah,
that all just sounds so impressive. You've got a great background there, and I just love hearing actually the broad ranges of disciplines and academic backgrounds within KTP Associates. And each company involved in KTP has a very different innovation challenge that they are seeking to solve. Now this could be new product development or process improvement or construction or AI. Honestly, the breadth is limitless. But what I want to know is, with Elm Grove Foods, what was their focus at the time that led them to a KTP?
Okay, so Elm Grove Foods to many was a company that wasn't heard by many in Northern Ireland and across the globe, but it had a global footprint. Elm Grove Foods was trading in all parts of the globe. It was a subset company of Dumbia, the large red meat processor that we know, operating across the UK and Ireland. So I had a lot of interaction with the team and the various teams in Dumbia. Met some brilliant people along the way, and they're still in contact with them to this day. But Elm Grove Foods was stimulated because there was a crash in the market. Okay, so they were focusing primarily on the selling and trading of offal-based products. So offal is fifth quarter, so liver, heart, lungs, those sorts of products which aren't desirable for our diets in the UK and Ireland. And they were going off to the likes of China, Malaysia, even Australia and Canada. And what actually happened was there was a crash in that market for Elm Grove trading out. And they took all the products basically from not just Dumbia, but from the likes of Foyle Food Group and WD Meats and others throughout UK and Ireland, consolidated them and then sold them on to Africa and places like that. And quite often was the case that this was food that was going off to sustain people's diets and lifestyles, where that food was maybe only perhaps that person's one meal in a day. So it was quite impactful. So you were working with a lot of things, but coming back, there was a couple of different products that they were exporting out at the time, going towards that of China and Thailand. More so China, to be honest. And what happened was, as I say, the market crashed, which meant then that the company was left with no routes out for their products. But the supply, obviously, because we still have a continuing red meat sector, the supply keeps coming on. So whilst we have the desirable primal products, there is those non-desirable to us offal products which are still sitting there. So they said, how do we create a new business out of this to bring about further productivity, to bring about a greater impact in what we're doing? So they had already done some initial research on that, and there's a couple of products there, and I'll touch on them briefly. And it's mainly cartilage products. Okay, so cartilage, as you know it, it's within the nasal cartilage of your nose. It's in knees and joints and stuff like that. So there's cartilage products like that are coming out. We're going off to China to be processed, and still are going off there. And they were being processed into a product called a nutraceutical. So a nutraceutical is a product between pharmaceutical, and a nutritional supplement. And that product especially was categorized down into glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate. So my project focused on that, of the chondroitin sulfate, which is used for the prevention and the build up of cartilage towards that of osteoarthritis. Okay, and then you've glucosamine coming in there as well. So there was a lot of things. So the whole process focused about taking in those cartilage products, breaking those down through an enzymatic reaction to release out this powdered product of chondroitin sulfate. And then that would be sold off and encapsulated. But then it also went to bring about then how we could bring in other products as well, and one of which was bovine bile. Yes, that is stinking. That is the bile that we have in our liver, and it goes across and it's stored in our bile duct or in our bladders, gallbladders and stuff like that. But the problem with these products is they were quite often going to China, manufactured in China or Eastern Asia or whatever. And then the next thing is they're coming back here with no traceability. We were fit to turn around and show full traceability from farm through to the slaughterhouse through to the finished product and bring it back that way. So that was the USP that we had. So we're developing that the whole way along. And that was bringing about the productivity of, increasing the productivity of the business, but also the sustainability of it as well. So that was all the whole reason of as to who Elm Grove were. Yeah. Why did they get into the market? Because of the crash and different bits and pieces. And then it's this new product development side of things. So there's a lot of stuff coming in there which built upon my research and engineering disciplines to understand how did that process work? How does this chemical reaction knock onto another? And what equipment do we need for that? And then the whole procedure of working with local regulatory government and national government as well to get product exported out. So quite often I was away to DEFRA in London to discuss export certificates and things like that. So a very colourful past, and it's actually one that I'll never forget either because as I say, medicine, I hated the thought of medicine because of the blood. First day that I went to work for Elm Grove, where did I end up? In the middle of the abattoir in front of a New Zealand client, and I was chatting to the New Zealand client. I thought, I'm getting fiercely warm here.
Oh no.
And I says, focus, and I started focusing on like the mechanics of the line, automation line and everything going around. And I was like, no, I'm going to check out here. And I said to the guys, I says, sorry, I'm going to have to go out here for air. Walked outside, poof, down like a stack, passed out in front of the customer. And I was like, here we go. And the best thing about it, it wasn't even here in Northern Ireland. It was in mainland UK. It was in a plant in England. And I was flying home that night, so it was a day trip, so I had no spare luggage to change into. So I fell into a mucky patch outside the abattoir. And it wasn't a nice experience. And then whenever I continued to do business with those guys, it was always a case, do you remember the time you were coming in and you passed out your first day? So that's what the story was there. So I never lived that down for quite some time. Yeah.
I mean, that's quite a memorable first day.
It was. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
You've also begun there to outline your role in this and your project's role within the company as well.
Yeah.
But just specifically, were there any academic expertise that were critical to the success of the project?
Yeah, absolutely. There was academic expertise that were critical and very helpful throughout the full 3 years of the KTP project. Both of those people was Professor David Rooney and Professor Colin McCoy from the School of Pharmacy. So David was obviously School of Chemistry, Chemical Engineering. And those guys were there as the academic leads for the KTP. Anything that I had in terms of my scientific thoughts or findings that perhaps I needed a little bit more reassurance on, or how to figure something out really difficult that I couldn't maybe understand or grasp from literature before I would start to develop that within the lab and ultimately at scale. I would all just run it past those gentlemen and understand if it was right in what I was thinking. So the academic expertise was critical to the project, and it's like all KTPs, you do need that academic arm coming into it, and that, after all, that is like the holy trinity of the three: academic, the associate, and the company, to make that come into the perfect trilogy. So there was a great cohesion between everybody there involved, and has seen the greater good that it brought towards not only the university but Northern Ireland industry and global industry as well, on a growing sector of pharmaceutical and agri-food. So, yeah.
Very good. And what sort of impact did the KTP have on the company?
The impact that it had in the company was successful again, because it allowed the company to grow in a couple of various different areas. So rather than being out the cost of shipping raw material to the likes of the Far East for processing, we were then starting to look at actually processing that on a much more local basis, so we wouldn't be out the extortionate freight costs. There was new product development and a USP with the markets that we were doing. It allowed the company to branch into manufacturing. So originally, with that section of the company, they were only trading. Whenever I come in as the lead research design development engineer, it allowed us to go and actually build and construct a factory from scratch, right the whole way through the various regulatory protocols and licenses and things like that. So the company grew. It also brought in further employment into the local region as well. And it also returned a net greater good back to our suppliers. So where, for instance, we had been turning around and purchasing in a material at a few cent, euro cent or dollar cent, we were actually fit to sell that or buy that off them again for maybe 10, 20, 30 euro cent or something. So you're actually returning. I think I done a calculation at one stage during that project that in the first couple of years of operation, we were fit to return roughly about 4 million sterling back to our suppliers.
Oh, wow.
Over a couple of years. Off that, that's what it was, but that wasn't obviously us making a profit. That was the raw material cost which we were paying our suppliers. So that was all. I think it was in around that. Yeah, in around that figure. So there was a greater benefit. So everything has a knock-on effect up and down the value and supply chains.
Certainly. I mean, it sounds like the company gained a lot from the partnership between the university and yourself, and I think the benefits of the program here really speak for themselves. But moving on, we briefly mentioned at the start of the episode about your career trajectory, so we're going to focus a little bit more on that. Now, decarbonisation seems to be a recurrent theme on this podcast, and I guess because it touches almost every single industry sector, but I have to admit, it is a topic I'm not incredibly well versed in, being from a broadcasting background and beyond, of course, doing my bit for the environment in my day-to-day life. But thanks to doing this podcast and speaking to so many talented changemakers like yourself, Una Barrett and Ansi Mary Alex, I'm learning a lot more of the significant importance of reducing carbon emissions across all industries. So can you tell us a little bit about the industry you work in, particularly focusing on any challenges it's facing and how it's overcoming them, and how in turn your work aligns with this?
It's interesting to hear there, Orla, that you've had all our podcasts there in terms of the decarbonisation of construction. This is probably going to be the the first on the decarbonisation of agriculture. But it's not just agriculture, it's agriculture, manufacturing, construction and logistics, which we're focusing on here with this one now at the moment. The whole decarbonisation thing, it is real. There's no two ways of denying it. It is real. It is a need that we need to do here now, to sustain our lives, to sustain our businesses, for ESG through environmental social governance, which basically boils down to sustainable and responsible business. That's how we term it. So we now have to give back to the environment of what we should for years of neglect. And that all came about obviously through that trip to New Zealand and through seeing the waste product just being neglected and then the testing of that and things. But it's all about returning that greater good back. So the whole decarbonisation aspect here of agriculture is we're sitting here in Northern Ireland where the emissions from agriculture is the highest it's the highest sector in the whole of the country, followed by that of transport. And then manufacturing, and so you have agri-tech, transport and construction all linking in. And it's the same across the water in mainland UK there as well. So we need to be doing something here with that, and it's how we bring that all around. So we've come up, we as a country here, we're good at figuring ways around things, being innovators. Okay, so we had innovators such as Harry Ferguson, which was the first revolutionist in terms of the 3-point linkage. He was an engineer, and that 3-point linkage went on to revolutionise farm machinery. We've had Thomas Andrews and ones like that. So there's a lot of knowledge and what I would call brain power and innovation comes out of this country. So we always find a way of sorting something out. We've been challenged here now in this country that we have an intensive agricultural system, which we have built and based our economy on over the years, that we are now in a position that we can feed 6 to 8 times our own population. So we are reliant on that economy or that agri-tech business and businesses to sustain everything that we have around us. So how do we sustain that in such a way which isn't damaging to the environment? But we've already seen that we have damaged the environment no later than last year with Lough Neagh, with the blue-green algae, which is caused from our agriculture and sewage systems, linking back down for the phosphate and things like that. So how do we start to repurpose that, divert waste streams, and bring it across? And this is summation in the last line of my KTP review, I think it was, and also the PhD, that waste is simply a feedstock in the wrong location. So waste to you is a feedstock to me and vice versa. So how do we repurpose that? And the way to repurpose it for us is we collect that waste or that bioorganic material from farms, we process that into renewable gas such as biomethane, process the carbon on it and recover the nutrients, so therefore we become less reliant on imported fossil fertilizers. That renewable gas then goes off to fuel our trucks, feed our industries and our manufacturing bases, and as well as that then there's other components that we're looking at to see how we can start to integrate that into a cement and concrete based sector for construction, for buildings, and also in tarmac for roads and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff which we're pulling in here together in this greater decarbonisation challenge, and I thoroughly do understand and believe that we as a region here is one that can emerge on a global scale to show that we can do this and we can do it at scale, because whilst we're a very small country on a global basis, we do have a large impact. So, and I think that's something that we need to always remember. We're small, but we are impactful no matter what we do. So we need to keep up with that.
Oh, absolutely. Small but mighty. But it sounds like there's a lot of exciting innovations happening within your career. But also, another exciting aspect of your career is how much you have travelled with your work. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the roles you've taken up since your KTP and some of the places you've travelled to for work as a result?
During the KTP, I was fortunate enough to travel to China. Worked in China for a week or 10 days, and that was to see the processes that was happening in China. That was an eventful trip as well. It seems to be everywhere I go is eventful. It was a great trip, so it was. Got to meet some great people over there as well, and knowledge building and everything too, and see how rudimentary the processes are in China and stuff, and how they could be refined as well. There was a couple of whirlwind trips to Australia and New Zealand. Australia was 40 hours of travelling, so 20 hours one way and 20 hours back, and 40 hours in land. So I think my body at one stage thought it was in Australia, but I was still in Northern Ireland in the mind. I don't know where it was. It was maybe somewhere hovering over Dubai. But then there was New Zealand to meet customers and clients over there, and that was another good and eventful trip. And that was actually the one that actually sparked me for this decarbonisation and sustainability voyage. So that trip to New Zealand was the one that actually I seen a waste material that I said, right, you know what, this is actually going to be of use to us here in Northern Ireland. We can actually put something to this. That was the one that the paper went into the journal for publishing and stuff. But I've been privileged enough to travel across France and Germany and mainland Europe as well, up into Sweden there this year to see a full circular economy manufacturing plant where brown bin waste from our homes are processed, used to fuel biomethane, or to produce biomethane. That biomethane then goes off to fuel the bin lorries and to fuel the buses for the public sector to take the kids to school and various different things. So there has been a lot of things there with that. I've been privileged to go to the United States as well to go and follow through an intensive dairy farm and dairying sector over there. And again, it's that's all coming back down through KTP giving you that opportunity. But as well as that, it's down to the individual, I think, as well, that whenever you're given the opportunity, jump at it and go.
Absolutely.
It's like what I go back to earlier. Whenever I done the KTP interview and whatnot, there was a letter of offer come across, and they asked, when could you start? And I says, well, I graduate on the 4th of July. I'll start on the 6th. So, but you have to be, maybe I'm all wrong with that. I could have taken a couple of weeks off or a month off to go travelling. But you have to be always mindful of that and on the go. But the travelling side of things, it's been great. I'm a natural traveller anyway. So it doesn't faze me one bit.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. I mean, it all sounds really exciting, and it's clear that the KTP experience has had a profound impact on your career.
Yeah.
But how do you think your time as a KTP associate has helped shape the trajectory of your career now?
How has it helped shape it? Well, I think there's a lot of things that has been a contributing fact to the trajectory of the career to date. Sometimes you have to learn to take the hard times, so you have to take a fallback and say, well, actually, you know what, I'll go again and I'll go at it another angle. Sometimes you have to take a sidestep to go up. So whenever I was going through the various different things, I just couldn't link across from what I was doing in terms of the agri-food and pharmaceutical side of things, because that business unfortunately started to dwindle away after a while because other competitors came into the market. There was this decarbonisation challenge came up, but at the time that the decarbonisation challenge, and I knew that it was going to be a thing, we weren't in the right place with policy and government, so I actually had to take a further step across. I stepped entirely out of my comfort zone with this one, and I went to work as a project contracts manager for a house construction company. So that, after being there for a few months, I went, this is not for me. This is definitely not for me. I want to go back. But I was always keeping an eye on what was happening in the decarbonisation phase. But that trajectory is complementary to the people who I have engaged with throughout my work profile, and that whether that be here at the university, whether that be within the KTP and Innovate UK circles and Invest NI as well. And also, as well as that, bringing that on further forward then to, other people in industry and going with that. And I think it's the KTP give you an idea, an opportunity to actually use it, as I said before, as a propellant to get up. And you're used to turn around and say, well, look, I have this idea, I'll check it out and go and do it. So that trajectory has been formed from that, but it's just motivation and a go-getter attitude as well. And again, comes back to the opportunities. Like this year, an opportunity arose to go to Brazil to present to the Brazilian government. Done it, and that was it. And it was great. And whenever you're sitting on stage with a past Secretary General of United Nations talking about decarbonisation and sustainability, and there's an array of Brazilian people sitting in front of you in Sao Paulo, you go, did I just come here to do this? Am I for real? And it is surreal. It is surreal. And it's one of those moments where you pinch yourself and you go, flip. The young fella from Markgrafelt is sitting in Sao Paulo doing a conference, and he's turning around and he's explaining his project and biorefinery and biomethane and how we go on for a circular economy manufacturing hub to these Brazilian folk and Latin Americans, and we end up getting further collaborations out of it. So we're now in a process where we're collaborating now with Brazil to work with Brazil here in Northern Ireland on a shared knowledge and transfer and innovation platform. So that has all come out around. So that's it. Trajectory is it's quite the path now. If I had to go back to say in 2015, whenever I graduated, this is where you're going to be in 2024, I would go, no, you're talking nonsense. But hey ho, one of those things.
But look at you now, though. I mean, what an incredible story. And it really sounds like you have gained a lot from being a KTP associate. And it's really clear as well to hear that you're very passionate about the work that you do and about renewable energy and decarbonisation. But what would you say is the key thing that drives your enthusiasm and passion for this area?
I think the main thing that drives me for this is returning a greater good to society.
Excellent.
Okay, so by returning a greater good to society is sustaining future generations of life in sectors of the economy which have grown for years that need to be sustained, but also building new businesses within the economy to sustain future generations. It's also about creating a platform to say that we can do it and we will do it. And I think that's where it's coming back down into that opportunity here to engineer a way out of systems, engineer a way out of problems, and a main point of an engineer is to be a problem solver. So that whole thing is about where we're going. It was about building the first biorefinery in Ireland and the UK on an agricultural basis, bringing in innovative new construction products. But how do we return that greater good? And it's just not all entirely through the biorefinery. We could be creating a renewable energy there, which will go into heat homes, heat businesses, heat local community groups. So heat, for instance, the likes of leisure centres and things like that, all from a waste environment that we have been discarding for years, that has then therefore created an impact, a negative impact perhaps in our environment. And I think that it's about the greater opportunity that we have, and especially fostering those ideas and bringing that forward. And it's about saying, like, there's nothing more that I like to see than having a spark in somebody who turns around and goes, we'll go for that, we'll do that. Yeah. I'm like, yes, somebody's in my court, somebody's in my arena, let's do it. I have an ally, let's do it. And that is all about bringing it forward and just showing, because I think we have went through generations upon generations, and this is no reflection of our ancestors or anything like that in a negative way, but we have basically reaped off the environment and reaped the assets out of it, and we need to now return that back through natural engineering methods. And I think that's where the whole thing comes in. It's a growing sector, it's an opportunity to grow. And look, for instance, if this was all up and running in the next 20 years, I would say there'll be another revolution to go through, because after all, if we don't go through modernisation, mechanisation, IT, digitalisation, we're now in the decarbonisation era. So we'll be in a position here that there will be something else to come forward.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, little by little you're changing the world.
Well,
that's pretty incredible.
I don't know, well, I'm going to change the world a bit. I think that's a bit of a high one now, to be honest, but we all have to have our bit to be a contributory effect to it.